Alright, guys, so obviously this is completely related to the herd movement, the anti vaccine movement, obviously. And a part of that is saying that this is a violation of the Nuremberg Code. And obviously, this is necropolitics that they are spreading. So, I will get to what the Nuremberg Code is in a second after this video. Or after this article, sorry. Alright, so COVID vaccines don't violate the Nuremberg Code. Here's how to convince the doubters. Emotive claims like the COVID vaccinations being unethical or coercive are more likely to be shared on social media, but we can fight back. People opposing vaccine mandates or COVID vaccines more broadly have claimed the vaccines violate the Nuremberg Code. They say COVID vaccines are experimental and people have been coerced into vaccination. They say this breaches the ethical code drawn up after the Second World War to guide medical research and human clinical trials. But this argument is flawed. Here's why the Nuremberg Code doesn't apply and how to correct this misunderstanding. So, what is the Nuremberg Code? The Nuremberg Code was a direct response to the atrocities Nazi doctors performed in concentration camps during World War II. They perpetrated this so-called medical experiment on people with no capacity to consent, and this frequently led to lifelong disability or death. The doctors who performed these experiments were tried in Nuremberg in 1947. The doctors' defense argued their experiments were not significantly different to other research practices. So, two American doctors working for prosecution produced a document that aimed to draw together what made for ethical research. This document identified three ethical, legal, scientific requirements for conducting human experiments, which were later expanded to 10. This 10-point document became known as the Nuremberg Code. It details the process of seeking legally valid voluntary consent, covers the need to establish the humanitarian nature and purpose of the experiment, as well as ensuring the scientific integrity and obligations of the investigators to the subject's welfare. However, the Nuremberg Code is no longer used to guide research ethics. The World Medical Association's Declaration of Helsinki replaced it in 1964, and there has been more ethical guidance since. I'm a little interested in reading this declaration from 1964, but remind me in the comment section or something, guys, about that, to make a video about that, because I've literally never heard of that. Okay, no, COVID vaccines are not experimental. Online commentary says COVID vaccines are experimental, but COVID vaccines have been thoroughly tested and they have been shown to work. Their side effects have been extensively examined. They have been approved for use around the world and have been credited for saving many lives. So COVID vaccines are not experimental. Now, COVID vaccines are part of the standard public health response. It's not appropriate to refer to codes or documents developed to guide clinical trials and other research studies. How do you convince someone? If you come across someone claiming COVID vaccines are experimental, you can try the truth sandwich to try to myth bust. If you examine two pieces of bread, then the filling in the middle, you are on your way to using the truth sandwich. Okay, so how I was told to convince somebody is to, if you know them personally, I guess, and you're on different like political spectrums, maybe try to talk to them in a nostalgic way to get through to how they perceived things, I guess. I don't know. There was somebody who tried to explain it that way to me. Alright. Anyways, first, we take a piece of bread and we state the truth. Okay. COVID vaccines have been tested in preclinical and clinical trials, and their efficacy and effectiveness have been proven, and their side effects profiles have been extensively examined. Then we come to the filling in the middle, where we talk about false claim and how it relates to the truth. You may have heard someone suggest the COVID vaccine program infringes people's rights under the Nuremberg Code, but the claim that COVID-19 vaccines are experimental is simply not true. Regulatory authorities have approved these vaccines nationally and internationally. Safety monitoring is ongoing, but these processes are routine and commonly used for other vaccines or drugs. Check out OSVAC safety. Alright, our final piece of bread comes next. Repeating the truth. The Nuremberg Code focuses on clinical research on humans, therefore no longer relevant once a vaccine moves beyond the clinical trial phase and has been authorized or approved for use globally. So when I was getting my vaccine, there was a vaccine that the people, when you go up to the booth and they're talking to you about which one you want, uh, one of those people actually said like there wasn't one that was officially like FDA like tested or something like or approved, and they suggested you take the other one, and so I don't know if that was true at that time, or she was just a paranoid person who happened to be like promoting some type of anti-vax thing. But I think if that was true, that person was being very helpful. Uh, I couldn't tell you what vaccine specifically, but I got mine in 2021, I believe, late 2021. Okay, where was I? Okay. Our final piece of bread comes next, repeating the truth. The Nuremberg Code focuses on clinical trials, therefore it is okay. The issue of informed consent. Online commentary usually cites the first clause of the Nuremberg Code about the need for informed consent in human experiments. The voluntary consent of the human project is absolutely essential. This argument is used as evidence there's something unethical about using vaccines or introducing mandates. Indeed, voluntary informed consent is an ethical bedrock for clinical research. Any form of compulsion is unacceptable because clinical research has inherent risks and can't be quantified precisely. Research also may not have any direct benefit for participants, which again requires consent. To be ethical, therefore, researchers must ensure participants in clinical trials understand potential risks and benefits and give voluntary consent to participate. How do you convince someone? Again, we use the truth sandwich to myth bust. Take your first piece of bread, stating the truth, the facts. The Nuremberg Code relates to research where the emphasis of informed consent is on preventing research participants from being used as a means to an end. The need for informed consent is still required for receiving the COVID-19 vaccine, or any vaccine, but the need does not stem from the Nuremberg Code. Here's the filling, the false claim, and how it relates to the truth. The introduction of a vaccine mandate is not medical research, but rather a public health intervention. In every setting where COVID vaccines are mandated, no one is being forced to be vaccinated against their will or consent. Informed consent is still sought before vaccination, and people retain the right to choose whether to be vaccinated. However, in these settings, the public health goal of COVID-19 vaccination is seen as outweighing the rights of the individual to remain unvaccinated. Other people in these settings have a right to health and security, therefore there are outcomes for those who don't comply. The exemptions are provided for those who cannot receive the vaccines for medical reasons. Unfortunately, people have the trauma of the collapse that was happening where people weren't working and elites were just out at restaurants while everybody was at home. Despite all that corruption, the vaccine uh, implementation made sense. Uh, I don't really specifically remember why lockdown had to be introduced, but I can kind of understand you just need the mass of people where there's an infection of who knows who has it. You know, everybody kind of needs to go bunker down, I guess. Oh, Jesus. You know, I was pretty much so scared back then and willing to do what I was told. I like my memory's just gone from all that. Trauma memory. Woo. Okay. Okay, if you want to expand further, mandates of this nature have previously been used in occupational settings to reduce the risk from vaccine preventable diseases. for the employees and for the people they come into contact with, whether they be hospital patients or aged care residents. Beyond these settings, we have accepted vaccines as a requirement of travel, such as yellow fever, both to protect ourselves and to reduce any risk of bringing this infection back to Australia. Final piece of bread, repeating the truth. There have been a misinformation about linking COVID-19 vaccination and or their requirements within some occupation, oh, yeah, occupations to the Nuremberg Code. The code relates to the research and claims that mandates violated are not accurate. Why is this important? This type of information often thrives in situations where feelings are manipulated and emotional posts on social media referring to Nazi doctors in Nuremberg are most likely to be shared. We can keep fact checking, but it's also time for every one of us to get out there with our truth sandwiches. Holly Seal, Associate Professor, Senior Lecturer. Okay. Alright, so on to the next article, which should be quick. And this is pretty much what everybody's referring to. So, the Nuremberg Code. The Nuremberg Military Tribunal's decision on the case of the United States v. Karl Brandt et al. Includes what is now called the Nuremberg Code, a 10-point statement delimiting permissible medical experiments on human subjects. According to this statement, humane experimentation is justified only if its results benefit society and is carried out in accord with basic principles that satisfy moral, ethical, and legal concepts. Okay, that right there literally is talking about like a health need. So, like it would be so easy to just avoid that because you don't really have to search very hard for it. And usually when we're looking for our points, we think it's just like I don't know, like we think it's buried in everything we have to like take apart to look for what we want, you know? So, all right. The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion, and should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved as to enable him to make an understanding and enlightened decision. This latter element requires that before the acceptance of an affirmative decision by the experimental subject, there should be made known to him the nature, duration, and purpose of the experiment, the method and means by which it is to be conducted, all inconveniences and hazards reasonably to be expected, and the effects upon his health or person which may possibly come from his participant in the experiment. The duty and responsibility for the ascertaining the quality of the consent rests upon each individual who initiates, directs, or engages in the experiment. It is a personal duty and responsibility which may not be delegated to another with impunity. The experiment should be such as to yield fruitful results for the good of society, uh, unprocurable by other methods or means of study, and not random and unnecessary in nature, which a pandemic and hunkering down for that absolutely is not unnecessary in nature. The experiment should be so designed and based on the result of animal experimentation. What? Oh, and a knowledge of the natural history of the disease or other problem under study that the anticipated results will justify the performance of the experiment. Okay, that's messed up, but sure. The experiment should be so conducted as to avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering and injury. Okay, 5. No experiment should be conducted where there is a prior reason to believe that death or disabling injury will occur, except perhaps in those experiments where the experimental physicians also serve as subjects. 6. The degree of risk to be taken should never. Okay, with the fifth one, this is like people who will listen to the status quo are the people who will work for you generally, and so those are the people who would get vaccinated. And so people who think that vaccines are just out there to kill you, that would make no sense for the economy. Okay. Six, the degree of risk to be taken should be never exceed that determined by the humanitarian importance of the problem to be solved by the experiment. Seven, proper preparation should be made and adequate facilities provided to protect the experimental subject against even remote possibilities of injury, disability, or death. 8. The experiment should be conducted only by scientifically qualified persons. The highest degree of skill and care should be required through all stages of the experiment of those who conduct or engage in the experiment. 9. During the course of the experiment, the human subject should be at liberty to bring the experiment to an end if he has reached the physical or mental state where continuation of the experiment seems to him to be impossible. And 10. During the course of the experiment, the scientist in charge must be prepared to terminate the experiment at any stage if he has probable cause to believe in the exercise of the good faith, superior skill, and careful judgment required by him that a continuation of the experiment is likely to result in injury, disability, or death to the experimental subject. And I would say this encompasses just the idea of vaccines in general, that they have been safe since their inception, aside from the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Um, and there's probably other medicalizations, but overall, given to the broader public, it'll always be safe. Especially if you want to even be cynical about this, just specifically healthy enough to work for you. Alright, guys. I'll be back in the next one.